Hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good evening. So we are very happy to have Karina Aguilera Skvirsky with us tonight. And I will be introducing my colleague Victoria in just a moment. But first, we would like to acknowledge the land on which the University at Buffalo operates, which is the territory of the Seneca Nation, a member of the Haudenosaunee Six Nations Confederacy. This territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Treaty of Peace and Friendship, a pledge to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. It is also covered by the 1794 Treaty of Canandaigua between the United States government and the Six Nations Confederacy, which further affirmed Haudenosaunee land rights and sovereignty in the state of New York. Today, this region is still the home to the Haudenosaunee people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, work, and share ideas in this territory. My colleague Victoria Udanzian in sculpture will now introduce Karina. So please join me in welcoming Victoria.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Becky. I'm super excited to have Karina here with us tonight. Yeah. So it's such a pleasure to have Karina Skvirsky here with us tonight. I first met Karina in the summer of 2023, where we were both resident artists at the Fountainhead residency in Miami, along with Delphine Fawindu, who visited, who gave a lecture here last fall. During that time, we connected deeply, making art, discussing all the complexities of the art world, as well as sharing meals, drinks, life together for the month. And even beyond the residency, we have remained good friends and colleagues. And to all of you students, I want to emphasize the importance of nurturing the networks you build with your classmates, your collaborators, and your peers. These relationships often become the foundation of your artistic journey, leading to opportunities, collaborations, and lifelong creative support. So invest in them. They're integral to your growth as an artist. Karina Skvirsky is a multidisciplinary artist, multidisciplinary Ecuadorian and Jewish American artist based in New York. Through video, performance, and photography, her practice navigates broader questions of place, identity, and nationhood. Her main subjects of interest are abstraction, politics, humor, feminism, and history. With her work, she's explored special topics such as the African diaspora in both the North and the South of the hemisphere, the complexities of indigeneity, and the legacies of colonialism. On Parallel.xyz, a space for art criticism and cultural debates from Ecuador, Rodolfo Chambers writes about Karina's work, and I quote, "In her work, we understand that identity politics are not simple, but multifaceted, multidimensional, and tailored to each unique human experience. If her work is effective as a lens through which to view the complexities of the social construct that shapes us, it is because, first and foremost, it speaks of her as an unrepeatable singularity. Her work exemplifies that individual yearning to chart their own existential inquiry in order to find a niche in the world. It is a journey that begins with an open analysis of our intimate experience, ranging from the events of our upbringing to continuous observations about her life in an effort to fit into the grand scheme of things," end quote. Multidisciplinary artist Karina Skvirsky's practice actually began in photography and grew into video and performance. In 2019, she received a grant from Creative Capital to produce How to Build a Wall with Other Ruins, a project that includes a series of sculptural photographs, a multi-channel video installation, and live performances. She has exhibited the project in solo exhibitions at Museo Amparo in Puebla, Mexico, and Pounds and Robles Gallery in Madrid, Spain. Other important international exhibitions include her participation in Impermanence, the 13th Cuenca Biennial in Ecuador in 2016, and the 29th Sao Paulo Biennial in Brazil. Her work has also been shown at the Deutsche Bank in New York, Smart Mellon Brooklyn, the Institute of Contemporary Art Philadelphia, amongst others. Karina has participated in several artist residencies, which include the Sakata Artist Residency in Itaparica in Brazil, Fountainhead Residency in Miami, office hours at El Museo de Barrio in New York, the Laundromat Project in New York, and McDowell Artist in Residency Program. Karina is also an Associate Professor of Arts at Lafayette College, Eastern Pennsylvania. Please join me in welcoming Karina Skvirsky.
Thank you, Victoria. That was like such a beautiful welcome. And she quoted Rodolfo Chambers, who I've worked with on many, many exhibitions. And, you know, I feel like understands my work in this weird, deep way. I also want to thank Becky for like organizing everything, and also the University of Buffalo Art Department for bringing me here. It's really, really a pleasure, and I really enjoyed meeting students today and doing critiques. Okay, so let me start. Right.
Just make sure. Sometimes it's in Zoom and
Oh,
okay. We should be good.
we should be good.
Yeah.
Right here. Okay.
Yes.
So I always like to start with these two photos, and in a way it's what Rodolfo was talking about, right? So, and what Victoria was talking about. My mother is from Ecuador, and my father is American Jewish, and he grew up in Brookline, Massachusetts. And the two photos you see here are from around the same period. They're from around 1946. I think my mother was maybe about 2 or maybe 1 or something. And what you see on the right is a photo of my Jewish grandmother and my father in Miami. And on the left is my grandmother from Ecuador, and she's seated in the center. I think she was like the head teacher of her school or something like that. And so these two photos, I really think of my entry point as an artist, as a child. And what happened was, so I have this mom who's Ecuadorian who, you know, didn't know English until she had to learn it. And even when I was a little girl, maybe she was still learning it. And my dad who never learned Spanish at all. Like, in fact, that's how he kind of got my mother to date him. He was like, I'm going to teach you English. So she needed to learn English. So she got interested in him, maybe for that reason at the beginning. But I was a kid, I was around 7 years old, and I opened a drawer in the living room, and there were all these photos, these loose photos like these. And I was like, what am I seeing here? You know, who are these people? There are my grandmothers. What is this family that I have, you know, these two worlds? And my mother was a teacher also. And so I went back and forth from Ecuador, and, you know, my experience in Ecuador was super different than my experience as like a middle-class kid growing up in Washington, D.C. But as a kid, you don't think so much about this. You just absorb these different experiences, and they're part of your life. So what I first did, my first kind of art, which I didn't know was art at the time, is I started organizing these loose photos in the drawer, and I started putting them into photo albums. And it took me a long time, but eventually I figured out the photo album that I made when I was about 11 was like an artwork in and of itself. I mean, I made some changes that you'll see, but it was already kind of an artwork, and it was very interesting in what it shows. Okay, so right here, what you're seeing is the presentation of a photo album. The pages of the original photo album have been photographed and then mounted, and they're all hanging on the wall. There are like 16 of them. It's maybe not the whole album, but it's most of the pages, or the pages that I thought were important. And this is hanging at the Sao Paulo Biennial in 2010. And this is really the first project in which I look at my biography and use that to make art. Like before that, I would say I had vessels, like things that represented me but weren't really about me. This is the first time I kind of figured out how to do that. And so these are the pages from the album. And the thing is, when I was about 9 years old, my family, we moved to Ecuador for a couple of years. And I had, because I was really into photography, like I was 9, but I had a little plastic camera. It was the 70s. I'm old. And I had a little plastic camera, and I would take pictures. And so I didn't actually take those 4 pictures because I would have been too young. I'm not that old. So 1973, that would have been, I would have been too little. So I wasn't actually taking those photos. I think I'm maybe in those photos, but these photos kind of represent this really, this thing that happens in Latin America, and I think it happens in other places too. Everyone you know goes to the airport to see you off, okay? So in Spanish, we call that the despedida, like the goodbye. So all the relatives, and of course, this is pre 9/11, so everyone goes to the gate, and they basically watch the plane fly away. And so these photos really represent that moment, that despedida. And you can see this text, right? And it's very childlike in the handwriting. That is like an addition I made as an adult, as like a fully formed artist. I wrote using kind of like, my handwriting is still bad, so it wasn't that hard, but I wrote the handwriting to look more childlike. Some of the writing is what I wrote as a child, and some of it I added based on my memories, okay? So I can read this to you. These pictures were taken when I was little. My mom is saying goodbye to our family in Ecuador. My Aunt Teresa and grandmother Lucrecia and cousins and the Leach's family are there. So alluding to this idea of la despedida. And here's the title of the piece, Karina's Pictures from Ecuador, 1977 to 78. And so I had this album a long time before I made this piece, and I really struggled because I knew the photos were kind of interesting, but I didn't know how to make the artwork. Like I kept pulling the photos out, like I got an MFA in photography, and I'm like, this is good, but I don't know what to do with it. How do I make this into art? It just took me a really long time to figure out it was already art. I didn't have to do much. So I lost some of the photos along the way, and that's what you see here, like where the little corners are, were photos at one time. I don't know where they went. So they kind of represent this ellipse or loss of memory, or you can read into it however you want. And then this photo here is really the reason that I turned my childhood photo album into an art project, because I was like, this photo is really interesting. What is going on in this photo? And I teach photography, and I often teach my students to read photographs, right? To analyze them and to look at them and to really kind of question what is is within the frame, just within the frame, right? A kind of semiotics. And so if we look at this frame, it's pretty interesting because we see this is a street in Guayaquil. That's where my mom's from, Guayaquil, which is the port city of Ecuador. It's kind of the economic engine. It's like our New York City, right? Like there's the capital, but everything, all the money stuff happens in Guayaquil. So we lived in this neighborhood, and this was like a homeless family that were hanging out on the street. That's my sister that was about 2, and that's my father. And I had the camera. And I'm like, why did I take this photo? And I've been asked, why did you take that photo? And I had to think, why did I take that photo, right? So I remembered my father was like, listen, and he still doesn't speak Spanish. And so even at the time, he didn't speak Spanish. He says, listen, we are getting ready to move back to the United States. You really should photograph all the problems here in Ecuador. Okay, so that's kind of weird. He gave me like a photo assignment, basically, to photograph the problems. And so he was like, take a photo of this poor family. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. I mean, I'm like, now I'm ad-libbing, right? Like, what did a photographer that was a trained photographer might pretend to photograph their family and then subtly move the camera over. But I didn't do that because I was a kid. I just included everyone in the frame, right? So there is the family, the very poor family behind my own family. And so it tells this other story, right? And that other story, we could think about it as first world, third world. We could think about it in many ways, but what it's not is like a kind of porno misery, which is where people photograph poor people and then show those photos. The thing here is I'm as a child bringing in my own family and showing my subjectivity. This is like a theme in my work, where I bring in my own experience into other things and other experiences, other interests that I have. So this is the photo that basically made this happen. I can read you the caption that went next to it that I wrote. It says, the pictures show my dad and sister and some poor people on the street. They are very poor and do not have a house. And so that's the caption. And so while, again, it could be seen in this way of like being problematic, there's something very weirdly innocent about it because of my childhood eye, right? And like not understanding those dynamics. Okay, here is another 2 pages, and you can see I'll read this text. My dad stepped into the hole with my sister on his shoulders. It was night, but I took the picture in the day. My dad wanted me to take the picture to remember the problems in Ecuador. And this was like, we weren't going to this neighborhood like where we lived in some other neighborhood. This was actually our neighborhood. This was outside our door. We weren't living some kind of wealthy life. We were living like everyday middle class, working class Ecuadorians. That was what our experience was, and that gives you kind of an idea of this album that really has launched all of these subsequent projects that I'm going to show you today. And so there's that idea of my subjectivity, and there's the idea of the collapsing of time frames, right? Like I'm writing those texts based on my memory, but so I'm bringing the present into the past and connecting the two, right? Like, in a way, memory is always changing based on how we think of our past, right? That's just part of how it works. So this next project required quite a bit of research, and it's called The Perilous Journey of Maria Rosa Palacios. And Maria Rosa Palacios was my great-grandmother, and she was Afro-Ecuadorian. She was from an area called Chota, which is in the northern part of Ecuador, very close to the border with Colombia. And so here is a view. It was projected like on the full wall. This is at the Cuenca Biennial in 2016. And what I had to find out is my great-grandmother was from Chota, and my grandmother was born in Guayaquil. And those are kind of, Ecuador's a small country. That's true, but they're pretty far away from each other, and you have to cross the Andes. Okay. So I figured out, because my grandmother was born in 1908, I figured out that my great-grandmother would have had to make that journey before then, like 1906, around then. And I'm like, well, how did she do the journey? Because there weren't any cars and the train hadn't been finished. A little portion of it had been finished in 1910. So 1910, the whole railroad is finished, and it connects the highlands, like Quito, where the capital is, and it connects it to basically Guayaquil, and it has to go through the Andes, which is basically like a continuation of the Canadian Rockies. The history of that development of the railroad is actually kind of similar to the development of the railroad in the US. I'll talk about that more. But this is a view of the video being projected, and I am going to show you a little bit of the video. So what I did was I reenacted my great-grandmother's journey. So what really begins as this journey about this research about my great-grandmother and where she came from also becomes a video about how people traveled before trains, before cars, and how they did that in Ecuador.
In 1906, my great-grandmother, Maria Rosa Palacios, left her home in Chota and walked over the Andes to the port city of Guayaquil to work as a domestic. She was 14 years old.
Le duele, sí, es que está duro, la sofita, o cartera, con familia. I got to see.
¿Y qué pasó cuando murió Rosa María?
Cuando murió ella. Le hizo telegrama a mi papá y le trujo a la hija, a doña Lucrecia. Ella bajó, no los hombres, pero qué brava es que había estado. Oh, que le han dejado muy a su mamá, que esto, lo otro, mi papá otro demonio, misericordia. Le dejas de llevarle a tu madre a la tierra donde han vivido, le dejas y venís a reclamarme a mí. Bravísimo y mi papá. Yo estaba y le deja botando mi barra. Y ahí doña Lucrecia parece que se le había llevado para... Le llevaría el cadáver a Guayaquil o a Quito, como haría. Porque mi papá les deja botando ahí. Estaba bien bravo.
¿Cómo era Lucrecia?
Casi una zambota gorda. Bien gorda era ella. Y un pelo, ya, quebrajoso limpio. Y donosa era. Donosa era ella. Para mi tía, porque es solo de mi papá.
Porque la tía no era bonita.
Al este de la hija, no. Ya estaba ya viejita, ya no estaba como hubiera sido más joven.
Ella era samba motosa.
Sí, samba motosa, mi tía Rosa. El pelo no era como el de la hija. Yo tenía un pelazo, hija, y gordota. Bien gorda, era para el marido casi era un seco y chiquitico, seco, pero para un baile el mismo diablo. Yo me acuerdo.
Me estás haciendo acordar de mi abuela.
¿Usted es su abuela, Lucrecia?
Claro, era mi abuela.
Entonces tuvo hijos.
Claro, 4 hijas. Y una de las hijas de ella es mi mamá.
Claro.
Okay, so that gives you a taste. It's about 30 minutes, so I won't play the whole thing. But I start walking, and then I'm on a donkey, and then I take the train for part of it, and then the train only gets you to across Guayaquil. YS is the river, so I then had to cross the river in a boat. And then finally I end up in a market, a fish market, and I walk through the fish market, and then I get lost in the city of Guayaquil. And I should say this is not I don't actually do the journey, which would have taken a couple weeks. Like if I actually did it, it's a film, so it's edited, and I did location scouting to figure out what I wanted to include. So this companion piece, so I work across media, right? So I made the video, and then I made these collages that are really a project that is informed by the video. And so this is called the Railroad Workers. So if we think about my great-grandmother as a migrant, she went to work as a domestic for a wealthy Spanish family in Guayaquil. We can also think of migrants that came to Ecuador to build the railroad. And they were from Jamaica, and they were also indigenous from like the Amazon area, and they were recruited to build that railroad, similar, like I said, to the U.S. railroad that brought a lot of Chinese workers. And so in this project, what I do is I embed the archival photos that have to do with the building of the railroad, hence the title, right? They're the workers that built the railroad, into landscapes where the railroad exists today. The tracks are still there, and actually the train still runs, although it's not really used for transportation. It's used more for tourism. And so these photos are also, it's hard to tell from the photograph of the collages, but they're folded. So where you see the lines are, the photographs are folded, and they're also like part of it is kind of three-dimensional. And so there's a slight kind of sense of movement when you look at them in real life. And you can see like how the photo, the archival photo, the way it lines up with the photo that I took, right, of that landscape. And you can see that it kind of looks like it's in the same place, but it's not necessarily in the exact same place. What I did was I approximated, and I wasn't interested in it being the exact same place, but I was interested in the photographs, the two photographs kind of connecting in a visual way. And so you can see how the building kind of continues, but then the people are just kind of floating a little bit in the sky as well. Or in this one, where a lot of what they had to do to build the railroad in Ecuador through the mountains was to dynamite, the mountain, part of the mountain, so that they could then create a tunnel. So this is kind of that kind of process within the archival photo that I then connected to a photo of a mountain scape taken at night, right, with all the stars. And so that project, which I finished in 2016, I was also working on this other project, which I had been doing. It was a live performance. And then I turned it into an installation with the live performance. And this is also related to the time that I lived in Ecuador. And it's called The Poems My Mother Recited. So my mother was a very, I always say neither of my parents are artists, but my mother was kind of artsy, and she was really into theater, and she was really good at reciting poems. And, she grew up, my grandmother was a single mom and worked as a teacher. And so my mom made money because she could recite poems. They weren't her poems. They were like famous poets, and she would recite the poems, and they were very theatrical, very dramatic. And she taught me how to do this when we were living there. And then I did them exactly the same way she did them. So I made a piece called The Poems My Mother Recited. And here's the installation of it. This was at the ICA in Philadelphia. And what you see are these press photos behind that are being projected with an analog slide projector, and it's continuous. And if you're in the space, you can hear me reciting the poems in Spanish. There's another photo. You can see my mom right there on the left, right? And here I am doing the live performance in which I'm basically imitating my mother who's behind me, right? And so there she is doing it at some important function. And so I dressed up like her, and I, wore the wig and the 60s dress. And then I recite the poems and I imitate her gesture. That's the performance. I am going to just show you very quickly. We're not going to watch the whole thing, but I'll show it to you a little bit so you get an idea of the performance. So it keeps, there's like 80 slides. So I keep imitating her, and then between slides, I kind of hit myself. We can all probably, if you're a woman, you can maybe think, or even if you're a man, you can all think about weird issues that you might have with your mama, right? So I'm kind of exploring that. It gets a little more aggressive. And I'll jump over here just so you can hear me recite.
Que no sabemos de aquí. Ay, mamá, yo quiero un gringo muy colorado, que tenga los ojos lindos como el cielo despejado. Mucho pedí, muchacha negra, conga y presumía, muchacha más pinchada, visto en toda mi vida. El blanco que tú quieres, te lo puedo conseguir, pero luego vamos a ver si te quieres solo a ti. El blanco te coge negra como una curiosidad, y cuando menos lo piensas, te va dejando botar. El blanco te va a empreñar, el blanco te va a patear. Si te juntas con un blanco, tus hijos son casi blancos. Tus hijos son casi negros. Tus hijos ya no son nada. Ay, mamá, yo ya no quiero un blanco. No quiero mamá. Ay, mamá, yo ya no quiero gringo. No quiero mamá. Yo solo quiero un negro. Negro quiero.
Okay, so that poem is about the dangers of miscegenation, written by a mixed poet from Ecuador, Adalberto Ortiz. And you can view the whole thing, and it's connected to my website if you're interested. But that's where that last poem is from. Okay, so this next project really comes out of the time I was in Ecuador in 2015 working on that video. I had received a Fulbright, and I was doing location scouting, and I found out about this site called Inga Pirca, and I went to Inga Pirca, and partially I found out about the site because I interviewed somebody. So you saw that interview that I did in that video that was my great grandmother's niece, right? So she's kind of like a aunt cousin to me. And so I interviewed people along, throughout the filming of the video. And one of the people that I interviewed was talking about how people traveled. And he was talking about how people used the Inca Road. And so I had learned about the Inca Road as I had done all this research about how people traveled before cars, right? And so the Incans were in Ecuador. They began in Peru, and then they spread to Chile and Ecuador and a little bit of Colombia. And so there is a site in Ecuador called Inga Pirca, which literally means Inca rock. And I became really excited after I saw after I went to this archaeological site. Here it is. This is Inca Pirtica, and you can see the llamas kind of just roaming around. And this is an example of Inca architecture. And Inca architecture is kind of interesting because the Incans learned how to carve rocks, put them together without mortar, and then build all of these architectural sites. So if you guys have heard of Machu Picchu, this is like our Machu Picchu, but a little smaller. But it's kind of interesting because it's an ellipse, it's round, which is fairly unusual. This is when they found it in the 1970s, and they didn't fix it up until later. And then this is a photo that I took, and you can see the rock and how it's changing color and how kind of beautiful it is. It's like that volcanic rock. And I became really interested in how this was built, this Inca knowledge, this Inca technology, and that the Incans found another indigenous group that was already living in this part of Ecuador called the Cañari. And that area of Ecuador is still called, it's a province, and it's called Cañar. And the people that live there, they really identify as Cañari. They still say, we're not Inca, we're Cañari. And granted, this happened in, the 1300s. So they have held on to their identity in a really interesting way. It kind of sets up some other pieces that I'm going to talk about. But first, I became really interested in this way of building, right? You can see how the rocks are like carved really precisely in these squares and rectangles, and then put together, basically like a jigsaw puzzle and without mortar. And it's funny because it turns out that there are these people that say it wasn't Incas, but it was aliens, right? Which is like another kind of form of colonization and then a way to like remove the Inca ingenuity and authorship from the project, right? So I was like, well, if you're going to say that it was Incans it was aliens that built Inca Pirtica, why not say it was women that built Inca Pirtica? So I made a piece where I'm carrying a rock, and it's called Carrying a Rock from Inca Pirtica. And yes, that's me. I'm like kind of thinking about the process of building. And this led to other pieces in which I started layering these Inca rocks on my body, sort of like fake performances. This is an actual collage. I know it looks like it's a digital collage, but if you look carefully, you can see a little shadow because the rock is folded and there's a little bit of three-dimensionality in the piece, right? And so I made these pieces, and I think of them as like kind of fake performances. They're smallish. I made some larger ones, but these are around 17 inches by 22. And I do think of them as this way of like literal. Sometimes I'm a little bit literal in my work, and I'm like, I am investigating these rocks. So I'm literally inside them or under them, like investigating them. And I'm thinking about them like that. And of course, I'm playing with the colors and playing with that the colors that are already in the rocks, right, from the volcano. And these are all titled Inca Pirtica, Inca Rock 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this is just a few of the series, a few of the examples from the series. And then this video that I took, videos take me a lot longer because I have to raise money for them. So I often will work in making works on paper, photographs, because it's like I can use my hands, I can like get into the idea immediately. it's very accessible to me, and I understand the language. And videos, I have to like raise a lot of money and figure it out. And so this took a few years for me to raise the money. It's called How to Build a Wall and Other Ruins. And what you're looking at are 8 video screens where that text is. And then the furniture, that's what you sit on to watch the video. And the furniture is also what is being made in the video. So I'm interested in these processes, like revealing the process of making, revealing the process of also making the video, as you saw a little bit in The Perilous Journey. So the first part of the video is literally the process of using recycled materials to make a replica of Inga Pirka. So instead of rebuilding it with rocks, we rebuild it with recycled cardboard and plastic bags.
Pues ya no se podría hacer porque no han podido. Gente artesana, por ejemplo, los picapedreros que hay acá, los artesanos que han trabajado en piedra, no pueden hacer este tipo de construcciones.
I'm literally asking people how they think that Inga Pirka was built. And
no se dejaron evidencias de lo que fue el proceso constructivo de ese tipo de muros.
So he's just talking about that there isn't a lot of evidence of how things were built at that time.
You know, I'll tell you what, I don't think there's an answer because no one was around when they were doing it. And I think it's kind of political, and I think they just want to build up an atmosphere to make you want to believe something.
So I also interviewed local historians in Ecuador, and I interviewed architects and archaeologists, and also people on the internet who said it wasn't Incans that built the Inga Pirka or Machu Picchu. And so to deal with those kind of conspiracy theories, I wanted to get creative because I didn't want to just give those people a platform. So I'm going to jump to that part, but I continue to interview people.
I would actually
I'll
try
let you
the way
listen to
I've
this one.
suggested, because I've made a recent video about it, and I would actually try using the lead, it's like a lead biopolymer solder technique. You use a type of lead ore, which is a red, it's a red substance, and the ink has mentioned a red substance, which is very interesting.
So we build the materials, right? We put the materials together, and then we have to take them to the site. So we put the materials together in Guayaquil, and then we have to drive them over to near Inga Pirka, where we make the replica. And so here's kind of the travel part.
I lived in Cusco for 6 years, and every day I would look at this stuff and just, continue.
These are the conspiracy theorists.
And that's why I would bring engineers and stonemasons.
Something I'm searching at, and I'm not the only one. People have been talking about it forever. Whether little birds barf on there's little birds.
Gravity series were able to achieve, but if you bring someone who's foreign again, who's
and the stuff that the acid that they barfed out makes the stone soft, and they peck themselves a little foam into the cliff. So people have been thinking maybe it's this acid. They watch the birds and whales. There are a number of Spanish nobles that compare those sizes, making stone soft
to the dynasty, or aliens, to be blunt.
Bueno, no estoy de acuerdo con esa teoría.
So eventually we work as a group, and we come together to build this replica. And I worked with local women from the Ingapirka area, and we built the replica together. And then that was then recycled into the furniture that we then sit on to watch the video. And I can show you a little bit of the building process. This is with the lights on so you can see the furniture. And here is the building.
El poder simbólico de la piedra para los pueblos y nacionalidades, hablaríamos, ¿no? Es la parte espiritual. Determinamos nuestros veitas, le habían mencionado como abuelas o abuelos a las piedras.
So she goes on to talk about how the rocks have energy. They have their own spirit, and they're like our aunts and uncles. And so she really kind of ends the video, and we complete it. And then in the credits, I don't know if I have the credits here, I guess I don't. But you can see the different kinds of views that when we finally finished it on the hill. And so, you know, after all of this research, right, I have kept making work about Ingapirka in a sense. Like it's an interesting thing. Like I work with projects, as you can see, and they usually have a shelf life or a set amount of time. Well, I've continued to work on these pieces. And so this last piece is called Monuments of the Past for the Future. And here what I'm really thinking about in this project is the hybridity between the Incans and the Cañari, that other indigenous group. So I sort of mentioned this before, but the Cañari worshipped the moon and the Inca worshipped the sun. And the shape of Ingapirka, the ellipse, is the only example is in Ecuador of an ellipse. And it really comes from the Cañari influence. And so I really have dug into this hybridity between the two cultures and thinking about that in these kinds of abstract figurative works. And so this is an installation that just came down in an exhibition actually in Ecuador, in Guayaquil. And it's three pieces that are wall pieces, and then these three sculptures. And so what happens in these pieces is I'm mixing organic shaped rocks, which I think of as representing the Cañari, with the carved rocks of the Incans. And I mix them together to create these kind of figures. And again, I bring my subjectivity in. That's like the back of my foot. And then I've added this other addition of alpaca wool blankets that I am dyeing different colors. And so that's what you see. That's what the orange brown is, right? And these are, so I'm mixing now photography with fabric in these collages. And here's another one. They're also, it's maybe hard to see from the photo of the work, but they're also have a lot of dimensionality. The rock on top is kind of folded and has a little bit of depth to it. Here's another one. And then here are the sculptures. And I think of the sculptures as referencing the kind of jigsaw puzzle nature of how Ingapirka was put together, right? You carve the rocks and then you have to put them together kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. And so these sculptures about this size, about 12 inches high and 24 inches long, then kind of reflect or reference that kind of jigsaw puzzle building practice. And here's another one. These are very recent. This is Monuments of the Past for the Future. This is Sun, and this is Moon. They're about the same size as the other ones, about 60 inches by 40 inches. And here's another installation I made. It's called Dreaming of Ingapirka. And so that piece on the wall is about 67 by 44. And then I also did an intervention on the column with all of the pieces, all of the cutout pieces that were left over. And so you can see a little bit of a close-up. And we can end on this one, which is called Dreaming of Ingapirka, which sort of is like a little bit of a reflection of all the work that I've done and thinking about, you know, this kind of long period since about 2016 that I've been thinking about this place and imagining these worlds and doing all of this research. I think about this again, like the square shaped rock is a Inca carved rock. And then there's these organic rocks that are more like what the Cañari did in their building practices. And I'm sort of floating in the sky. The Incans and the Cañaris, they really looked to the cosmos for inspiration and understanding. They understood so much about them. And so this piece kind of is a reflection of all of that work that I've done. And thank you. And I guess we have time for Q&A, right?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Karina. It's open for questions, folks.
No questions?
Who wants to start us off?
Yeah, Justin.
So I guess like one thing I found interesting about your work in particular is that like you sort of emphasized how, well not emphasized, but you mentioned how the sort of like alien conspiracy theories of the Inca architecture is sort of like demeaning to the efforts that the Incans made and sort of to their culture as a whole. And like I think it's important to sort of like, I don't know, acknowledge that and like this is just one of the many examples in like which that happens throughout history, and like I guess it sort of makes you think as to what the art and design world would look like without the sort of like eradication of these cultures, because it's the same thing with like modernism and like minimalism. I feel like those tend to sort of like, I don't know, consider more cultural works like less, what's the word? Sorry. Like less civilized. But yeah, I'm not really sure what my question here is for you. I feel like that was just something interesting, and I appreciated you mentioning that.
Yeah, and it's something like it's kind of shocking to think that, you know, on television, you know, like the Discovery Channel, that conspiracy theorists like around this information, around mystery, right? There's like somebody that I interviewed, and I didn't show it to you, but you know, you guys can watch the we only had an hour, but you can watch the video if you want to. It's a public video, but she says like when there's mystery, people bring in their own interpretation. But I think it's more sinister than that. I think it's for money. It's like it's a way to make money, but it's also a form of erasure, right? It's a form of cultural erasure. And I wanted to bring that part of the story in, but I wasn't sure. I didn't want to give more of a platform, right? And so that's why I treated it with that kind of cacophony of like what I call the, you know, crazy people or the charlatans, whatever. to try to bring in some humor to what they were saying, because it doesn't make any sense, right? And it is very dangerous. It's very dangerous. And it does damage to people of indigenous descent. Yeah.
Do you feel that this has paid homage to your cultural history and this series is complete with this project, that this particular piece being the end, or do you think that this will continue to evolve? Like, what's next?
That's a great question. So I do have some other pieces that are related to like the column that you saw. I have a few, and I didn't, I could have ended it there, but I didn't want to start a whole nother thing. So I think it's like, maybe there's like one more project, but I don't believe in like being like, okay, it's over. Like, I'm still interested, and I'm still like learning things, and I've gotten sculptural, and I've added material, and I'm just kind of continuing to kind of explore the ideas that seem to have, they have my attention. And so I am making another video that's a little different, that has to do with a different period of Ecuadorian history, the 1700s, and it has similar themes. It's colonialism, and like I basically reenact these little sculptures that have to do with Catholicism. Anyway, it's a whole other piece, but stay tuned. It's almost done.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First, I'm curious, do you want to speak to the relationship of sculpture to photography within the context of your work?
Absolutely.
Because there is something sculptural about your photographs, and these guys, I'm not sure how you should tweet them. Are you thinking about them as photographs or collages? Because there's all of these overlaps, so I'm curious about how you're thinking about them. And secondly, the cultural pieces that you just showed, what are these made out of?
Oh, okay, so I'll answer the second question first. They're made out of wood, and then I didn't make them myself, but I designed them and then worked with a really good fabricator. Yeah, and then they're painted. I think the first time I made a different series. They were enamel. These are like just, I think, more of a regular paint, but maybe a glossy. Yeah. And then the second question, yes, this interest. So photography is like the thing that I know so well, right? Like, I literally have been thinking about photographs since I was about 7, and that is not a lie. So sculpture, but it's like, yeah, I think maybe it was like, in terms of the trajectory, it was kind of sculpture, and then I started to do video, and I did animation because it was still images, and then I guess, yeah, architecture is kind of, I think, the connection. Like, I always have been interested in architecture, not in a formal way. I didn't study architecture, except for like a couple of classes. But I think I've been interested in it, and like space and those a lot. I have a lot of photos of homes, and yeah, like I think it comes out of that, and certainly from a very early moment. I think it was in college. My photo skills were terrible, right? I had not such great photo technically. And so because of that, I would like experiment with the bad prints. And so there was kind of a material interest in the photograph. And once you get materially interested in the photograph, you enter into sculpture, like in a way, like it becomes more three-dimensional. And, I am totally, and performance, of course, is in a space. And so that is like, something else that that came out of my video practice. I mean, I went to a graduate program that was like strictly photo, but clearly I was interested in how photo relates to all of these other media. And like, there's usually something to do with photography in there, but I'm not using it in like a, you know, in a purely photographic way. I'm using it as an entry point to like think about other things. And I think it's true, like sometimes you have to follow the idea. And if the idea requires an installation, or the idea requires a video, or the idea requires a performance, then that's what you make, and you figure it out. And I think that's what's happened. I'm just following the ideas, and it's leading me into the media, and you have to take those risks, right? And it can take a minute, because the first experiments don't always work out too well. I didn't show you those.
I find the images to be quite compelling. Sort of the way you're layering the bodies with the rocks, and it becomes sort of this. Well, it's interesting to think about architecture, right? Architectural, sculptural bodies, but also sort of having the whole body totally artist. They're very powerful.
Well, one of the things that maybe I didn't link up, but is like when you have these, you know, multiple ethnicities, races, like how do you kind of deal with that? And I think it's that, I think putting myself in the work is how I can deal with that, right? And it's like literal, it's making literal the thing that I'm kind of doing, or pointing to the labor involved in the making of it, right? Then I'm sort of in there, and I'm not pretending that I'm not in there, right? It's like it's a way of like bringing in a kind of subjectivity, I think. And I feel like it has to be me because of the hybrid identity, and since the works have to often deal with like hybrid identity or multiple ethnicities, or however you want to. I'm thinking about it as hybrid right now. Like that's the way I'm thinking about it. So that's why I'm using that language.
I was curious, what is the material of the replica, like the furniture?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Was it like a printed, like I was curious about that surface.
Okay, so it's melted plastic bags. Oh. Yes.
Melted plastic what?
Bags, recycled bags, yes.
Because it had a different, like I feel like surface is a big part of your work, like
yes.
The surface of the stone and the surface of skin, and that one I was like, what? I was like, what's happening there? I was really intrigued.
No, it's kind of amazing. I worked with a sculptor friend of mine in Ecuador, and I was like, I want recycled materials, but I want it to look like rock, or I want it to echo a little bit of the porousness of the rocks. And so
interesting.
I have to say she figured it out.
So it's all kind of merged together, but wow,
yes,
that's amazing.
Yes, with different layers, right? Yeah. Yeah, and then the cardboard, obviously the furniture has a base of wood so that you can sit on it and it won't collapse. Yeah. But yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah. How long did it take for you to complete each one of your projects? It seems like a lot of like research and just trial and error goes on behind the scenes.
Yes, that's really quite accurate, right? So like I have photographers often, the work happens out in the world, and I do that, but then I do a lot of experimentation in the studio. And so I work on video because it takes more money, and because there's so much research involved, like those projects will take years, right, to kind of get off the ground. But in my studio, I can make photographs and I can collage, and I know I keep using my hands because that's literally what is so satisfying about doing that. So it's much faster, right? I can work through the ideas much quicker. But it still takes a while, like a lot of maquettes and like resolving it can take a while. Like the series of the railroad workers, I shot the video for, I think we did it over 12 days, and then I was in Ecuador and for months. And so I had the photos of the location scouting, and I had the photos from the railroad, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should put those together, right? Like my studio practice, just experimenting. And honestly, like it still wasn't right. By the time I came back to New York, I was like, oh, you know what? They're too flat. So then I started folding them. And then it's like so in a way, it's like the first time I put them together was 6 months, by the time that I figured out I wanted to fold them. And some projects are like that and some are not. Some are like much faster. So I think the hardest thing is like figuring out, did I resolve it? Did I get it? Sometimes sometimes you have to let it sit. Sometimes you have to keep looking at it. There's no like one way. It's really dependent on the piece and, what's happening. I mean, I think it's like, the only thing is like, I have faith that I'll figure it out, or I'll just put it away. And then it's like, then it'll become part of some other project. Like those photos of me, that were like naked, that I put the rocks on top of me, those were for something else that did not work out. And then I just had them, and then I was like, oh, maybe I should try this. And so, yeah. Any other questions?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Karina.